This is our last module that deals with this first unit, and so we're going to have that unit test next week, at the end of this module. And so we're going to continue looking at the United States and the growth as it becomes an empire. Now, we may not think of ourselves as having been an empire. We actually were founded on the idea of anti-imperialism, right? When we break away from England, we say, hey, no tyrant should be ruling an empire. And then within the next 100 years or so, we basically begin to set up our own empire. And we are kind of covering this a little bit out of order to some extent. Again, it's one of those times in history where we kind of bounce back and forth between the time frames. And it really kind of starts with Teddy Roosevelt, and where we kind of talked about his presidency in terms of, being progressive and some of those ideas. But this section kind of syncs up with like the last module and a half, really, on where it kind of falls up. Now, the U.S. up to this point has basically been about, covering more territory and heading west, right? Ever since basically Jamestown, there's been this idea of English colonists and then American citizens pushing westward, right? We're going to expand the United States all throughout the first half and second half of the 19th century, which is the 1800s. And we did that through a lot of different ways. We negotiated, we went to war, we stole, we bought, we traded, we did all of these things. And by the second half of the 1800s, we end up basically having all this effort to populate the West, right? Which is what we talked about last module. We're going to populate the West. And we're going to make it safer to settle, and then we're going to incentivize people to move out there. And, by this point, we're going to go from coast to coast. And then we're eventually going to get to Alaska. And Alaska is basically going to reach us all the way to Asia with Russia, almost touching Russia. And then we're going to start looking and going, how far can we go? How far can we expand? And so to fill this desire that's really happening in the 1890s and early 1900s, the reason that we have this even bigger desire to continue to expand beyond just the continental United States comes down to a lot of ways industrialism. Industrialists are going to seek new markets. They need new materials, new raw material sources. They need wood. They need metals. They need, land for agriculture. And they want new markets to sell their goods. So if they're looking for a cheaper source of resources and a new place to sell their market, you're going to have, people saying, hey, it's easier if we just set up colonies, and then those people are our colonies, and then we'll get a cheap discount on the materials. Well, congrats. Now you're just setting up an empire, which is what you were founded against. So, but, it's not like America's the first to do this. In fact, we're probably one of the last. We are very effective at it, though. Like, if the European powers, which had been doing this for a while, are kind of the framework for it, we were like, watch this. We have the best military. We have the best Navy. We have capitalism. Just watch what we can do. You better ask the natives, right? And so it's definitely this ideological force. Now, we also have a military aspect to this that, hey, big military, strong military. If you're going to spend all this money on your military, you want to use them, right? You don't build 100 warships to just have them sit out there and do nothing. You build 100 warships to go to war, right? We have this idea that we need military bases because then those military bases are going to protect our economic markets, right? Nobody's going to try and rob us if we've got warships 10 miles away from them. And then you have this other idea of, Christianity and democracy and this shining star city on a hill idea of what America is. We're going to spread this to the rest of the world. Look at these poor people in the middle of the Pacific Ocean on this little island called Hawaii. They still have a king. They don't know how great it is to have a democracy. I'm going to show them, right? They don't know how good capitalism is. I'm going to show them. They need to understand that they're stuck in the old ways. They got to move to the new ways of, being free under our rule, right? And so you have this superiority of people that says, hey, you know, if you're a native population, you just need some guidance. We've got this down pat. We've got the best system that has ever been invented. We'll show you how to do it so that you don't have to languish in this, you know, lifestyle you've been living for thousands of years without being disturbed and seem completely happy in. You can't be happy because you don't have wool, you don't have fur coats. So how happy can you really be, right? Now, there's a lot that we talk about there, and we really kind of turn our attention to Hawaii here because Hawaii has a very long history of its own. We don't have to get into all of that, but it is very ideally located to make a naval base there. It's out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, so if we're trying to get goods from the United States to, say, China and Asia and India and get materials back, our ships are going to need somewhere that they can port and resupply and refuel. And, you know, we need to have a point where we can launch, you know, for protection. Hawaii was perfect, right? Very lucrative and smart place to set up a naval base. Also, they have really good agricultural land. American missionaries want to go there and to Hawaii, and they want to, you know, they get there and they start trying to spread Christianity. But then we realized, like, hey, I bet we could grow sugarcane here, right? And, you know, also spread the gospel about Jesus Christ, of course. But, of course, the sugar industry that develops in Hawaii is going to happen for pretty obvious reasons, and that's going to lead their king, Kalakaua. I'm sorry, any Hawaiians listening to this. He is basically going to be forced into negotiating a treaty that is going to make Hawaiian sugarcane cheap to import to the U.S. And that goes on for a while, and then it ends up becoming a very messy situation when he dies, and you have a new queen, Queen Liliuokalani, and she is going to basically put an end to that. She's like, hey, you're taking advantage of us. We're not going to allow that to happen anymore. You've basically set up a shadow government here. We're our own people. We're not going to keep putting up with this. And the U.S. government is like, yeah, you are. And they literally go in and put a gun to her head and make her sign a treaty and lock her in a tower or in her palace. And they go, oh, no, she's still the queen. And then they completely take over the island and basically start to just steal the sugarcane. And then they promote this guy, Sanford Dole, and they make him literally the president of the Republic of Hawaii. So they lock her away, and then she gets access to guns and tries to lead a revolt, and then, yeah, it's crazy. That's a pretty terrible story. And you can see this is Queen Liliuokalani. And she's trying to rule her people independently as a sovereign monarch, and she starts this new constitution, right? And as we said, and she says, hey, Americans are taking all of our money, and so we didn't like that. Again, we overthrow her. She actually ends up being locked up in her palace from 1896 until she dies of a stroke in 1917. We keep her prisoner. The Queen of Hawaii, we take prisoner, lock her in a palace because she wouldn't give us a good deal on the sugar trade. America. Yeah. And so, yeah, pretty rough. And again, Sanford Dole ends up becoming the the man in charge there. Of course, in the intervening years, about 1894, 95 to 98, it's officially a U.S. territory, but we don't make Hawaii an actual state until 1959. For a long time, we don't actually make them a state. They're just our territory. So believe it or not, yeah, like they're not technically even a state during World War II at Pearl Harbor. Yeah, they weren't even a U.S. state at that point. It took forever for us to make them a state. And so, you know, there you go. Again, there was in February of 1895, there's a rebellion against Spain in Cuba. And what we do there is we go to war with Spain. Of course, earlier European empires have more or less gobbled up all the available territory. And so, you know, they become powers in the West. They basically want economic and prestige. And of course, they're trying to acquire land. And America, we have this booming economy and we have this powerful military, and we're like, no, we need access to that land, not Europeans. They're closer to us. And so we're going to go to war with Spain. And America knew it was a really good opportunity. And so, the Spanish and American tensions, they build into an open revolt. And long story short, the Spanish round up anybody suspected of supporting independent Cuba, puts them in concentration camps. He executes a bunch of them. Like 200,000 Cubans die because of this guy, this Spanish guy. News comes to America. It gets to the mainland United States because of like yellow journalism. They exaggerate it. Guys like William Randolph Hearst, Joseph Pulitzer, they write these stories about, how terrible it is in Cuba. The Spanish are treating the Cubans so bad. But realistically, we just want to be the ones in charge of Cuba. Like, it's kind of a ploy to kind of get the American people to be like, well, we should do something about it. And the government's like, yes, we should. I'm glad it was your idea and not the government's. Right? So they're trying to drum up public support so that the government doesn't look like they're trying to set up an empire, because America doesn't set up empires. No, we're going to rescue the poor Cubans from the Spanish. But we don't want to. It's because the American people want us to. Right? But really, it's the military-industrial complex that says, hey, we've got all these new boats. Let's go blow something up. Ammunition makers are like, hey, y'all need some bullets? Y'all want to go to war? We'll sell you some bullets. Let's go to war. Hey, William Randolph Hearst, why don't you make up some stories about how terrible it is in Cuba? And William Randolph Hearst's like, okay. And then the American people are like, we should go save them. And everybody's like, yes, it's working. Sorry, government's corrupt and evil, so don't trust them. That's my point. Anyways, people demand that the U.S. intervene in Cuba. It's right in our backyard, obviously. And so this is a golden opportunity that we've been waiting for. And then something really terrible happens. So President McKinley sends the USS Maine. And he goes and says, hey, we have business interest in Cuba. We're going to go take our battleship and go just park it out in Havana, outside of Havana, to make sure that the Spanish don't go in and try and mess with American citizens that are in Havana, right? So we're going to just go park our ship, okay? Then, on February 15th of 1898, an explosion occurs on the USS Maine that sinks it. Oh, no. And it killed like several hundred soldiers, U.S. soldiers. And who do you think got blamed for that? Spain! Oh, Spain didn't like that we parked our boat up there, so they exploded it. But guess what? It was a boiler explosion on a brand new boat. A conspiracy theorist would say, we sank our own boat and killed American soldiers so that we could say, look, Spain attacked us, now we really have to go in. That's what a conspiracy theorist would say. There's no real proof of that. But we do know that Spain didn't sink the boat. It was probably an internal explosion that led to it sinking and killing people. But boy, did we say Spain did it. And boy, did we invade Cuba, right? The Spanish minister had written a very scathing letter rebuking McKinley to a personal friend. Boy, isn't that nice? So the Spanish minister had basically written a letter to his friend. That letter gets intercepted, and it's all like, this McKinley dude is an idiot. I can't believe he parked his boat. And then, so that letter gets stolen and finds its way into the hands of William Randolph Hearst, the newspaper man, who then prints the letter and makes it seem as though Spain thinks that we're stupid and moronic and that our president's an idiot and that they didn't like us being out there. And then our boat got sank. And then all of a sudden, guess what? Everybody's like, go to war. And the U.S. government's like, okay, I guess if we have to. Sorry, I'm a little skeptical of this whole situation with retrospect and, how much the government really does lie to us. But in all reality, come to find out, there is a chance that like that letter that was stolen and printed in the paper was made up. That didn't even exist. We just made up a letter to kind of justify what we did. We declare war on, they say that the Spanish attack was a terrorist attack and say it was an act of war. 260 soldiers die, and they have a declaration of war. Now, McKinley, to his credit, is very calm at first. The Spanish government agrees to an armistice in Cuba immediately, ends the concentration camps, and it seems as though compromise was in the reach, but the American public really doesn't want to back down. So they go like, Spain is like, oh, our bad, Hook, we didn't blow up your boat. We don't know what happened. We're sorry. Like, hey, we'll let all the Cubans go. We won't make any big deal. And McKinley's like, okay. But then the yellow journalism keeps going like, oh, Spain is just killing babies and children over there of Cubans, and they're blowing up our boat. And look, their ministers think that we're idiots. And the public is just like, war, go to war. Yeah. There's a quote here. It says, remember the Maine, to hell with Spain. That's printed in like newspapers. You know what I mean? And it's the war cry back home, and they're not going to be so easily appeased. And so, again, Spanish had always said, hey, we didn't blow it up. But we keep saying, no, you did blow it up, and now we're going to basically go to Spain and say, hey, look, we're not going to get bullied, right, into Spain and taking a bad deal. Congress passes something called the Teller Amendment, which promises that they say, hey, America, we're going to go push the Spain out because we want to free Cuba. We're not an empire builder. We're going to free Cuba. And so how are we going to free it? This is the Teller Amendment. Remember that. They say, hey, we are going to free them, but we will not annex Cuba into the United States. We're not going to make Cuba a state. We're only doing this so that they can be their own free country, quote unquote, right? It's very careful, and, they declare open war on Spain, and pretty complicated story gets going pretty quick there, but there you go. It's largely centered around the Caribbean islands here. Also, though, for some reason, we end up in the Philippines also fighting the Spanish, which is not even close to Cuba. But we figure, hey, we're already fighting the Spanish. We might as well take the Philippines too. Why not? And so we force a blockade around them, and then we go in and we attack and we bring people in. And, you can see pretty quickly that we're going to kick the crap out of them. Ultimately, it's, pretty quickly, it's a landslide win for the United States. We're really not even very well prepared for the war, but we are extremely enthusiastic about going to war. The American people are really excited about it. Even though we're not really ready, we're like, give me guns, give me boats, let's go. Okay? And so... we do learn a lot. We learned that it was necessary to have a really strong Navy, and that we had to have better equipment to fight against, other soldiers than we did to fight against the natives on the frontier, right? So we even more ramp up the military-industrial complex, this idea of making even better weapons and even more prepared for war. That's going to happen. We had an incredible numerical advantage as well, but we also realized something really important here, and I'm going to jump back here. We have an issue. At this point, 1900s, we realize we've got a really big problem, and that is, if we bring all of our boats over here to fight in the Atlantic, we had to sail them all the way around South America, all the way back up. We start realizing pretty quickly we need a way to get from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean a lot faster. This is going to be the beginning point of realizing that we're going to have to build the Panama Canal. Okay? So just kind of understand that, like, the Spanish War in Cuba, that's going to really bring us into the idea that, like, oh, Panama Canal is going to have to happen. Okay? We end up winning the war. The whole thing's over by July 17th. And then later that summer, the Spanish also surrender in the Philippines. So now we have the Philippines that are going to be a territory of ours. We're also going to look at one of the other, like I said, the big outcomes there is the Panama Canal. And also, this is going to help us build towards World War I. Now, Theodore Roosevelt becomes a national hero because of the war in Cuba with the Spanish. He led a group of soldiers at a place called San Juan Hill, and it really catapults his political career that ends up culminating in his presidency. He really takes advantage of this battle. He's get elected governor of New York in 1898, and he becomes the vice president in 1900. And that was because of his group known as the Rough Riders, who were basically like a early special forces group that he leads into Cuba. And they're a very valiant regiment. They actually included a couple African Americans, Mexican Americans were involved in this. They bottle up the Spanish forces in several big battles, and he becomes a war hero because of this war in Cuba. Again, he also led African Americans in African American units called they called them smoked Yankees, which is kind of pretty racist. But during this war, you had 26 African American soldiers get certificates of merit, 5 Congressional Medals of Honor for African Americans. And they worked alongside Roosevelt and the Rough Riders. And so we talked about a lot of the racial tension and problems that the Jim Crow laws and Reconstruction and segregation had made. And you're going to start to see an idea here that African Americans are valiant and they care about America, and that if we can fight alongside white people and stand tall in war between this and World War I and then World War II, and eventually that's going to lead us into the 50s and 60s with Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement getting even further ahead. But it's all kind of planting the seeds for that in this time frame as well. And we're going to kind of realize that a lot of that came from this point. Now, the U.S. victory over Spain elevates America's position in the rest of the world. It is yet another war that ends with the Treaty of Paris. Spain gives up all claims to Cuba, and Cuba is going to be, quote unquote, independent. But, America is the protectorate. So we're like, you're like our little brothers. Don't worry, we got your back. But you're free, don't worry. You just have to do exactly what we tell you to do, right? U.S. gains naval bases in Cuba, like the Guantanamo Bay, which we still have. We also gained territory in Puerto Rico and in Guam. And Spain turns over the Philippines, although we do pay them $20 million for it. We annex part of that. It becomes a big debate whether we should annex it. And these territorial gains are really going to strengthen the military and economic position of the United States. And really, get to the point where we are trying to really expand globally and become a world power, not just a North American power, not just but a global force for good to spread democracy and Jesus, of course. So the war increases overseas possessions, recognition as a world power, and we get ideologically, the mentality of the average American is, that Manifest Destiny was just the beginning. Coast to coast is great, but now we're going to be worldwide. America, worldwide, which is kind of a pile of rubbish, but there it is. U.S. soldiers become stationed outside the country. America has this really strong political debate over whether or not we should be imperial, whether we should have imperial expansion or not. Opponents of it become known as the Anti-Imperialist League, and say, hey, we really shouldn't do this. This isn't what we're built on. But the proponents of it say, no, we're going to build an empire, but we're not going to do it the bad way. We're going to be a benevolent empire. We're going to be like like good empire people. Like, oh, we're going to have colonies, but it's to make them better, you know? Like we did the natives. We made their lives better, you know, because we brought them democracy and Jesus, you know, which, you know, whatever. The debate's going to rage on, again, the Philippines. It's going to be a major controversy. There's the people for it and making it a territory. They believe the United States has a duty to spread its values overseas. Also, the Philippines have an economic and strategic value that should not fall into the hands of the other countries. It's a good staging point for any markets there in Asia, right? And if anybody goes to war, we've got military base right there in Asia. Against it, believe that it would violate the general idea of, you know, like self-government. It's literally a colony. Oh, we're going to allow self-government by taking you over. For you, of course. They didn't want oppression to occur. The United States, they said, hey, don't you think that, you know, we should probably, you know, take care of all the problems we have here before we start, you know, stepping in the way of other people's problems? Like, you know, we got racism and segregation and real, you know, inequality here in America. Do you really want to export that to other places? And they believe that if they annexed it, there were some racists out there being like, hey, if we annex those Philippines, they're going to come to America and take our jobs. So obviously there's some of that. Ultimately, we do decide, ultimately they do have this debate. We don't ever actually like make them a state. The Philippines never become a state. But, you know, U.S. expansionism is kind of characterized by, you know, we do annex Hawaii, Philippines, Puerto Rico. We don't make them states, but they're territories. We now have a major power in Latin America and Mexico. We exert influence on China and Japan, and then we make Cuba a protectorate. And guess what? Now, America, world power. World power, America. So within 100 years, we were like, yeah, heck with that no imperialism thing. Let's do it ourselves. The end.